Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's session of Culture Break. Today, I'm really privileged to have my wonderful guest, Corey Madden, Executive Director of the Monterey Museum of Art in California.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
How did you get here to the Monterey Museum of Art? Tell us a little bit about your journey. I know it has to be interesting.
Thank you. It's so great to have that question asked. I do have an interesting background. I grew up in Washington, D.C., and my mother was actually the Director of Education for the Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian from the time that I was 10 on. And so I grew up in a museum. And in fact, when my mom didn't have childcare or on summer vacations, she was very enthusiastic about having me come in. I did a lot of collating, sat on the information booth, all kinds of things like that. So I really grew up around that incredible resource of national museums and really spent an enormous amount of time in them as a kid. But I went into theater as a young person and spent almost 30 years primarily focused in theater, particularly new play development. In my mid-20s, I moved to Los Angeles to work at the largest theater on the West Coast at the Music Center of Los Angeles Center Theater Group. And interestingly enough, my boss was very interested in museums as well. And so I became kind of the person who, in addition to producing new plays, did a lot of work with museums all around town. So I created a lot of programming with museums, worked with them pretty deeply, and began to have a kind of hybrid practice where museums called on me to think about engagement with audiences. I also ran the youth education program for 10 years at Center Theater Group. So I have a strong background in education. My mother was obviously an educator. So I think that that's where some of that comes from. This is my first museum direction opportunity, but they're a lot like theaters. They're venues. They have the public to serve. They put on shows. There's a lot of production. I found it not impossible to translate. There was a lot for me to learn, which for me, again, is as somebody who is restless, creative, and interested in challenges, I think that was particularly the appeal of this job, was that I would learn a whole new domain where I've spent a tremendous amount of my life. I've been a lover of visual art for 45 years and have gone deeply into being a autodidact of someone who's read the lives of artists and work with living artists and think a lot about that.
And you and I have had a number of conversations about this blending of roles between being a museum and being a presenting organization, which is right. A little bit different. So tell us a little bit more about your vision for the Monterey Museum of Art and how we're helping you get there with this project.
Thank you so much. Monterey is a really interesting place in the world. They call it the Serengeti of the ocean. So it's got one of the most beautiful ocean environments in the world. It's also very physically beautiful. There are unique, both geographic and environmental qualities to the coast. It's rocky. It has these beautiful cypress trees. And of course, that served as the inspiration for generations to painters who are here, and continues to be inspiring to people who want to come to our museum. It's also a place where people come, 5 million people come a year. So it's a very, very active touristic region, very small in terms of population, about 90,000 people in the kind of 5 cities that we call the Monterey Peninsula, but over 5 million people coming a year to visit. So that's a very significant thing to know about the area. And many people will make that connection between what is beautiful here and then the idea of what a museum might offer them, which is a chance to sort of see that environment through the eyes of other people, or to get to know California artists. This is also a place where artists have lived, not just painters, but writers, poets, dancers, musicians have lived in this region for hundreds of years. And again, you might say it's also been a place where indigenous populations lived and celebrated and had material culture. So the material culture of this region is also very interesting. So I think that those are some of the ways in which we're drawing on natural beauty, we're drawing on touristic population, and then maybe the third element of that is presenting. There's a great tradition in this community of festivals, the Monterey Jazz Festival probably being one that is known internationally, but also the Bach Festival, the Carmel Bach Festival. So a number of performing festivals, arts festivals, where people come from all over the world in order to experience this region and music or in that setting. So I think one thing that we've been really talking a lot about, looking at data and looking at how our museum can shift its relationship to the public, is to look at the role of festivals in relationship to both local communities and the diversity that we really want to serve of those communities, all the different nationalities and ethnicities that are represented here. And then drawing people who want to come down to Monterey for the weekend who have a cultural interest or who have an interest in connecting through a festival. So we do really see the museum as a combination of showcasing the best of California art, particularly regional art, contemporary, but also inclusive of what we call pre-1945. And then in addition, presenting and offering all kinds of festival format kind programming.
How do you think that will change the museum's historical operation? And what are things that we've been talking and thinking about as far as how that fundamentally changes you?
Well, this may be partly where my background in theater is actually useful, because theaters are venues that scale up and scale down for the size of production. In a sense, even though they're indoors, they are in a sense festival format programming. You're presenting and you're bringing audience in every night. For us, it really means that we have to build our short-term staffing. We have to be able to hire up a group of people who have the skills to do programming outdoors, to do programming that's live, to do design that might be environmental design. So that's one piece of what will change about our museum. I think also we're benefiting a lot from Lord's advice, which is really about how our museum can increase our earned income by being a venue where people want to do their own events. So we want to really envision a rooftop terrace for this reimagined museum that can be rented privately and that can be accessed privately, so that we can run programming from these beautiful locations where you can overlook the bay, connect it to art so that people really understand, oh, one way that we enhance this experience is by interpreting it.
And how do you think the relationship with other organizations in your community, including the aquarium, will change? And how do you envision yourself and the Monterey Museum of Art sort of coalescing that?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I lived and worked in Los Angeles for 28 years. And again, a lot of what I did was help develop performing arts programming for museums, which is now a defining part of how Los Angeles operates. Los Angeles has a huge jazz program at LACMA. The Getty Museum has two magnificent big programs, one of which I helped design, which was the classical theater program that's at the Getty Villa. And then the big program on the main campus of the Getty, which is all kinds of summer programming. And what that did to the Getty is that it completely opened the Getty up. It really made the Getty recognize that they needed to engage broadly with the arts community. And I think that that's a great message for museums, which is it is wonderful to have a core collection and for that collection to be central to your work. But it's also critical from the point of view of really crossing over with audiences, getting audiences to make these associations. One of the kind of mantras when I was first starting out giving talks in Los Angeles about why performance was important was to emphasize that that the disciplinary distinctions between arts weren't actually helping the arts, and that to be completely kind of linear within visual art, or to be even more specific in medieval painting, when you were running a museum could create a lot of limited ideas about what that platform really was capable of. And I think that the new generation of museum directors really embraced this. Ann Hamilton
The keys to success, for what I'm hearing you say, is to be successful in a contemporary museum environment, is to really see yourself as part of an ecosystem of cultural assets, and to work together in a broadly holistic way to do that placemaking and finding meaning out of place.
Absolutely. Yeah. So this is one of the things I think Lord has been very helpful, and I love your infographics. And it's a great example of an infographic that you've given us to work with that's really helped our board, I think, has been to show where museums fit into the ecosystem and to see them. And I use, again, a lot in my speeches, I'll talk about a museum is more like a library or a hospital or a university, and that it's an important association for people to make, because then they understand, oh, universities aren't just one subject, that universities aren't limited, and universities are doing exactly the same thing. So, we're working with CSUMB, we're working with the local hospital, we're working with Youth Arts Collective, we're working with the school system, obviously, and we're working with a lot of arts organizations that support younger emerging artists and or artists who are not, as enfranchised inside institutions. And those are all really important parts of what we're doing as we move forward.
We're so pleased to have been able to work with you on this project. So thank you so much for being here, Corey, today.
Thanks so much for interviewing me. Take care.